This is the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 6th of October, 2024. The reason I waited was because I'm a professional and I needed to hit the post for the music. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
Well, it's been a couple of weeks, largely because of my occasional propensity to suffer life-threatening emergencies and spending a week in the hospital, which I think I would rather get sick on a regular basis throughout the years rather than just save up for a one-week hospital stay every 5 years.
Pack it all into one-time event.
Yeah, although it is more efficient that way, it is
True.
A hell of a lot less pleasant. So I ended up having to have surgery again, and well, let's just say that it was not a fun week. 5 days in the hospital is not my idea of a good time, or anybody else's, I shouldn't think. But we're back, we're getting better, and we're recovering. You, I assume, have been fine for the past couple of weeks, so everything going.
I have not
okay
been in the
on your end?
hospital even once.
Well, that's very good. Good to hear. I have one bit of advice about going to the hospital: avoid it. Well, let's start off by this whole situation in North Carolina and what's going on with
Tennessee,
this,
Georgia, Virginia.
what's going on with this disaster recovery. FEMA says, hey, we're doing fine. We're delivering millions of meals, and we are getting the job done. Which, okay, it's the government. You can believe as much of that as you want. But people who are on the ground are saying a lot of troubling things about FEMA's response. I don't know why anybody would be surprised at that. People on the ground, at every response to which FEMA has responded since it was created, have had complaints about FEMA's response.
It's true.
In fact, I think Ron DeSantis kind of said it best. Florida learned long ago not to rely on FEMA for any emergency rescue or rapid response. And he goes into a fair amount of detail about what a complete Charlie Foxtrot FEMA is. And in his words, and I love the way he put it, I think what he said is, we rely on FEMA to basically be a bank account.
And that's really the best they can do.
Well, people on the ground are saying all kinds of stuff about FEMA's response. They're saying that FEMA is going in, not to churches yet, but to schools and sheriff's departments. They're just taking over all of the relief supplies and, inventorying them, and they're just taking charge of things. How effectively is anybody's guess. But people are saying that FEMA is just not getting it done. The people who are getting it done are private organizations like the Cajun Navy, who are running mule teams through the mountains and stuff like that to bring supplies. There have been reports that FEMA has and other officials have threatened to arrest people who are doing, private rescue and resupply attempts. Let's leave aside any sort of
Ulterior motive?
Any sort of ulterior motive. All right, let's just say, even if we were to assume that FEMA is just filled with people from top to bottom who have the best interests of the American people at heart and who really want to do a good job, even if they wanted to, I don't think most people realize how massive and incompetent and bound by pettifogging rules and regulations that FEMA actually is.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, and that's true of any large organization, government or not. Government has it, is hamstrung a lot more. And by all accounts, and we saw this with Katrina, we saw this with Harvey, we saw this with I can't remember what the other big one was. Irma? I don't remember, but uh, we've seen this over and over again that the most responsive and the most effective responders are local people. Like you mentioned, the Cajun Navy. I mean, these are the people that not only know the area really well, they have the resources and they have the will to help.
And they can get in, and they're not bound by these same sort of regulations.
Yeah, they're
Um,
not hamstrung at every turn.
and I just don't think people realize that even if FEMA really wanted to help, they are almost incapable of doing so efficiently or competently. It's
Yeah,
it's
and we've seen this time and again.
Yeah, this is nothing new. We can spin all kinds of theories about, these are, deep red areas, although quite frankly Asheville, North Carolina is pretty deep blue. But you can get to
It's a dot though in a big giant red ocean.
Yeah, but I mean, you can get to Asheville. Right? So people who are living in Asheville are saying, yeah, things are going okay. We're, still on power and this and that, but things are being distributed. Yeah, but that's okay. You can get to Asheville. It's
Yeah,
all
because
of
it's in the foothills. It's not actually in the mountains.
Once you get up into Appalachia, then you've got you've got roads that are completely washed out. And while these are not mountains in the way that those of us who are from out west think of mountains,
Don't be shitting on our mountains.
when we think of the Rockies, the fact is these are usually densely wooded and overgrown
Sparsely populated.
and
They
hilly
have
areas.
lots and lots and lots of deadfall.
Limited
Uh,
egress and ingress to many of
yeah,
these areas.
very much so. And
So,
they're kind of, especially down around the Tennessee, North Carolina, Virginia border, that they're very they're not very high, but they're very steep. Lots of crevices. This is why you get so many flash floods there. It rains on the whole surface, and then they just goes into these crevices and fills up, the lowest point it could find. So it gets very difficult to navigate, especially if you don't know where you're going or what you're looking for.
and the way FEMA and almost any bureaucracy operates is they want all their ducks in a row, and they want to do things in an orderly fashion, and they want to maintain and that, I think, is my dog is hitting my camera stand. So if I'm shaking, you know what the deal is. It's this bureaucratic need to control and to try to account for all possible variables. They're uncomfortable with ambiguity. So even if they wanted to help, and even if they had the best will in the world, they are so hampered by their pettifogging regulations, they couldn't find their own asses in a dimly lit room, basically.
I mean, it's really a personification of what Hayek wrote in The Road to Serfdom. That no matter how well-meaning or how earnest the people are, they simply cannot have enough information to understand individual situations or decisions. It's just not possible. You need to be much more dispersed down to the local level. Is usually best.
And that's why DeSantis says they just don't in Florida, because if you want to talk about an area of the country that is routinely hit with natural disasters, America's penis is that place because they're in the path of every hurricane. And
Pretty much, yeah.
and look at the way the state of Florida pre-marshals all of their resources and gets everything ready to go days in advance. And the second these hurricanes pass through, they're just out. I mean, they're ready to go instantly. And Florida doesn't wait for anybody to help out. They just get out there and do it. And like DeSantis said, one thing you can count on the federal government to do largely is to write checks.
Right. Although they're
Although,
running out of that money, but
yeah, that's something else that we have to talk about. Do they have the money
and
now to
also
write
let's put a
checks?
pin in the whole pre-positioning assets thing because I've got something to say about that as well.
No, go ahead.
It astounds me that this administration, well, Kamala Harris was blowing off all of the, disaster prep, her hurricane briefings, natural disaster, FEMA briefings. It just didn't care. And
No, she's got an election to win.
that's where you learn,
She's got
what you
podcasts
need
to
to
do.
know. Yeah, right. And so, I mean, but that's how you know, okay, I'm going to need probably this stuff here, that stuff there. We can pre-position, call it the National Guard. I mean, the National Guard and state guards have been called up by the governors. But man, it would have been helpful to have some of those military assets, a lot of which are in North Carolina and Georgia, um, to have them pre-positioned in order to help out. Florida already had not just National Guard and State Guard pre-positioned, they had like a ton of electricians, utility workers ready to go at the drop of a hat.
And
And I mean, that's the difference in being prepared.
yeah, now obviously Florida. How does one put this? They have less geographical complications than Eastern North Carolina
True.
because they have no hills, no mountains, no rivers, no valleys. They just have flat land
Sand.
and yeah, flat sand and lakes.
Sand and a lot of swamps.
So, the logistics aren't quite as bad in Florida, although the swamps in southern Florida do complicate things, one presumes.
And well, and also the Keys, because there's only one way to get there. Either there's two ways, by boat or by car. I mean, I guess you could fly there
Or
too,
by
but
air, by helicopter.
yeah, yeah.
But once again, and I don't understand why we don't learn this lesson that FEMA is just absolutely incompetent. We don't even have to go to whatever the theory is about, it's all a red area, so the Biden administration doesn't care and they're not doing any things. Because even if I'm not sure they're competent enough to be that incompetent. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that would take some.
They
that would take a level
during
of,
Katrina, right? And that was under George Bush.
Yeah, exactly. FEMA has always been a disaster. They never show up on time. Every time they do show up, they complicate things. They force people to live by these rules. They don't trust anybody that they don't control to do any rescue efforts. They're more often a hindrance than they are a help.
Yeah.
The idea behind FEMA was good, but every time FEMA has been called out, it's you have to work around them. Because working with them is for the average person is nearly impossible.
But also, why don't we have one of our either an aircraft carrier or hospital ship, one of the ships that can produce fresh water, for example, the hospital ships that can actually take care of people if the local hospitals are overwhelmed.
Well, that doesn't help you much in western North Carolina. You're hundreds of miles away from the shore, so.
Well, that's true, but just being able to create the water would be helpful.
Yeah,
and
well, any U.S.
when all
naval
these people
vessel
are now
can,
flooding to Eastern Carolina, you're going to be short of resources. So having that sort of help would be really nice.
Well,
the USS Ramage could show up, and hell, it can get into the bay for North Carolina inside the Outer Banks.
But as far as I can tell, a lot of active duty military resources were not called up. You've got
right.
I mean, if you want helicopters, you've got at what used to be Fort Bragg. I don't know what they call it anymore because
I think it's Fort Liberty now.
Yeah, sure. So anyway, at Fort Bragg, the 101st Airborne Air Mobile has a shit ton of UH-60s that they could fly pretty much anywhere, and Blackhawks and things like that. Were they marshaled? It's difficult to.
According to people on the ground, they've seen very few of the military aircraft. Now I know that um, at least the Tennessee National Guard has been quite active in getting out into eastern Tennessee and rescuing people, but North Carolina seems to have been hamstrung just ridiculously. I mean, held back. They're preventing private flights from going on. They're
Yeah, they're shutting
stopping
down the
shipments,
airspace.
taking all the they're taking all the supplies that are being brought in. They stopped shipments of Starlink, which Elon Musk gave them for free. It's just, and like you said, it's because, well, no. We need to be in charge. This is our deal. We'll distribute.
Yeah, how much of that is bureaucratic chest thumping,
Yeah.
and how much
Fiefdom protection.
yeah, and how much of it is, well, who cares about these hayseeds and rubes?
I mean, I do think there is probably something to that, but at the same time, like you said before, I mean, even with the best intentions, that they're gonna fuck it up.
And the thing is, everybody knows this. We've seen it happen
Yeah.
time and time again. And every time there's a major thing like this and FEMA gets involved, everyone is shocked to learn that FEMA is more of a hindrance than a help.
Doing a great job, Brownie.
Yeah. And then, of course, there is the talk about money. Now, look, money is fungible. I understand that. But the way these things are budgeted by Congress, certain money has to be spent here, certain money has to be spent there. You're not supposed to dip your hand from one till into another.
It's not a general fund. It's appropriated
It's
to certain
appropriated
programs.
funds. And
Right.
so, Congress certainly has to have some blame for underestimating the amount of emergency funds that FEMA would need. I mean, the idea that
Well, there is that problem with spending a billion of it, a billion point four
1.4
on
billion on illegal immigrants.
on the illegal immigrants to make sure that they're all cozy and safe and warm in their nice little hotels that we kick the veterans out of. It's just, and then what really burns my hide is watching this administration, Tony Blinken and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, bragging about all this money we're sending to Ukraine to help them keep the lights on. To Lebanon? Why are we spending $157 billion in Lebanon? Like, why?
It reminds me of that meme that people have posted, which shows missiles flying in towards Israel and the Iron Dome missiles firing up at them with two little panels on it, one that says "my tax dollars" and the other pointing at the other missiles, somehow also my
tax dollars.
Yeah, but there's always money for Ukraine. There's always money for, and look, I understand that all the money
downtrodden,
all the money that we spend on all sorts of foreign aid is really a drop.
It's a drop in the bucket, yeah.
But still,
hey, that drop could
$100 billion
$100
$100 billion could buy lots of soup and bottled water and things like that. Buys
Absolutely.
a lot of avgas for helicopters. It hires a lot of people to get in there, even on a temporary basis, just to work and
buys a lot of chainsaws.
Yeah, it's funny. The federal government always has money to do the things that are important to the political class, and yet somehow American citizens are always on the tail end of that.
And that's, I think, what's most striking about it, and just so blatantly in our faces, that this government cares more about people who aren't Americans than about actual Americans.
Yes, and by the way, it's yet another illustration of a political system that doesn't seem to work for the citizens of this country. You want Donald Trump? This is how you get Donald Trump. We've been saying this since 2015.
We were saying it in 2008, quite honestly, back when, what was it? Glenn Reynolds called it, name your destructor, or, form your destructor, or whatever, choose your destructor.
Choose the form of your destructor.
I mean, that's essentially what's happened. The reason they freak out so much about Donald Trump is he's an outsider. He's upsetting their apple cart. He is a challenge to the political class's stranglehold on power in this country. And we rubes are not smart enough or well versed enough to pick our own leaders. No. We have to give you a couple different choices that are basically the same. So vanilla and then French vanilla, maybe chocolate. But other than that, no, you don't really get to choose anything else. No, chocolate mint chip, no butter pecan. You get these three choices.
And then they wonder.
It's all from their own ranks.
And then they wonder why populist movements spring up. And
this isn't just here either.
Yeah, it's not just in this country, as I was about to say. You can look over at what's happening in Europe and the number of far right parties that are doing very well in elections. Because the thing is, as long as you have elections and as long as the voters have some say, then when the political system no longer delivers the results that the electorate wants, they will search for alternatives.
Yep.
And the longer that you prevent the voters from finding an alternative, the worse the alternatives tend to be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you thought that Trump was bad, what do you think's coming next?
Yeah, because people aren't just going to go, well, Trump failed. I guess we lost. Now we just have to turn over our country to you progressive
to the Romneys and yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just not going to happen. We're tired of it. It started, with the Tea Party movement. That kind of went underground. It got co-opted a lot too by a bunch of grifters. But it moved towards local races. And what we've seen is in localities that there's been a lot more, not necessarily populist, but certainly more citizen inclined type leadership. I mean, that's how you get DeSantis. That's how you get Abbott. I mean, frankly, that's how we got Youngkin in what's essentially a blue state here.
Yeah, because people are going to find those alternatives. Now, hopefully they're good alternatives. Trump is probably not the best messenger for Trump's message.
I mean,
but it is a crapshoot. But people are gonna start looking outside the establishment for some sort of champion who they think can win. And sometimes the champions you pick are pretty sketchy people. And the longer you prevent reform, the sketchier they get. John Kennedy said something, 60 years ago, that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable.
Right. Pretty clever line, actually. I wonder if he wrote it.
Probably Ted Sorensen. But at the end of the day, it's quite true. And
it is.
If you're afraid,
it's a great observation.
If you're afraid of Trump, and this is the thing, this overblown fear of Trump is really starting to irk me. Because at the end of the day, Trump left the White House on January 20th.
We've got a record.
2021.
We've already seen what he does.
We've already seen how he governs. I don't like Trump personally. As a person, I think he's a jackass. All right, but we've seen how he governs. We have a fair idea of what his policies are going to be. And look, we can argue pro and con on some of Trump's policies. Those are normal policy disagreements, and I'm perfectly fine with having those and having those discussions. Trump is who he is. That's not going to change. That's baked into the cake. So complaining about it is unnecessary. But
Which
this,
is why all the complaining doesn't move the needle.
yeah, but this extra step that they've gone, democracy is on the ballot.
What does that even fucking mean? I still don't know what that means.
I don't know what it means exactly, but I have a pretty good idea that democracy is on the ballot. Because what
I
happens?
think our republic's on the ballot.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
What happens if Kamala Harris wins? You know, Elon Musk made a statement, wrote a Twitter thing about how if Kamala Harris gets elected, they're going to allow all of these illegals that they've allowed into the country to vote. And they expect that what we're going to end up with is a one-party state where they just win everything. And then they can
that's the plan.
And then they can do whatever it is that they want to do. And when you look at how things are going in individual states, like this last week, when California, the Governor Newsom signed into law a new law that prohibits any election official from requiring any ID to vote. It just prohibits it
crazy
in California. Okay, fine. Don't tell me that my elections are free and fair and open.
Yeah.
Whenever you
absolutely.
do everything possible to ensure that we can't vet the electorate and we can't know who is voting, and dare I say it, how many times they're voting, make it impossible to do that, and you're going to destroy all of the trust in every democratic institution we have.
States are being prevented from cleaning up their voter rolls. I think it's either Minnesota or Wisconsin. They have 4 million ineligible voters on the voter rolls. 4 million in a state that has like what, maybe 7-8 million people. That's just ridiculous, and they're not allowed to clean it up.
It's weird that every time there is some sort of rule or law or whatever that's proposed that would make the election system more secure, that Democrats are dead set against it.
And they scream voter suppression.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is voter suppression, illegal voter suppression. It's ineligible voter suppression. We only want the people who are actual citizens and of age and alive to actually vote.
Yeah, but trying to ensure that becomes disenfranchisement.
Right.
Well, who's being disenfranchised?
Yeah. Oh, but Dale, voter fraud is just it doesn't really even exist. It's so negligible, so little that it doesn't really even exist. Right. If you can't go look for it and you can't stop it at the beginning before we even get that far, I'm thinking that maybe it's not so negligible. We know that lots of non-citizens have voted. We know that lots of dead people have voted. We know that people have voted twice. There's been a smattering of elected officials who have actually gotten jail time for essentially voting or allowing many, 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 many votes that either were, double voting, triple, whatever, or just completely ineligible votes. And they're encouraging this. They're trying to make this an actual thing. And they're not even being, cutesy about it anymore. They're flat out saying, Chuck Schumer came out the other day and was like, yeah, we need to make all these illegal immigrants legal. That's the only way to do it because we're not making enough people here. Our fertility rate is down. So we got to get these people in here. And yeah, that's the only way we will survive as America.
Well, here's the other thing. If you have a system where you can't control who is actually casting ballots, then you don't need a system where you deliver fake ballots on election night to counting centers.
True.
Because if you don't know who's casting ballots, and you can bring in a whole bunch of people who shouldn't be voting and who should only be voting once, or who are dead or whatever, and you have no way of vetting who's providing those ballots, then you don't need to do sneaky stuff like backing a truck up to the loading dock of the counting center at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Finding extra votes in the back of somebody's trunk.
Yeah, you don't need to do that. You find all of your extra votes before the election, and you just ensure that the ballots get cast. And you ensure that you have a system that can't vet that the people who are casting ballots are the people who are supposed to be.
Well, that's one of the things I can't stand about early voting is once the vote is cast, there's not much you can do after that. I mean, once it's cast, it's going to get counted. Absent some errant pen stroke or something. I mean, it's going to be counted, and there's almost no way to tell whether it's a good ballot or not.
And California now has universal mail-in voting. Sure, you can.
Is it Colorado? And I think Colorado and Washington automatically send out mail-in ballots to every registered voter.
Yeah, and we can't clean up our voter rolls, so if we send them to a bunch of dead people, well, they're dead. They won't vote.
Well, they won't get returned because they're dead, right?
Yeah, exactly. And California does the same thing. Just this week, we got our ballots for the November election. So technically, I could vote tonight and mail that ballot in. And they go through all of the rigmarole of having a website so you can check and be sure that your county supervisor has received your county clerk has received the ballots and they've been placed in preparation for counting and all of that other stuff. So it looks great.
You know what I'd really like to see?
It looks like security, but who's sending these ballots in? We don't know,
it's
and
Potemkin,
we don't care.
Right, it's Potemkin security.
Yeah, it's all security theater.
I would like to see where, a rule I would like to see is that nobody reports the returns until everybody is finished counting. So in other words, there's no way that, like, for example, Philadelphia can say, well, we're not quite done yet. How many did they get out there? And like, how many do we need? Or Atlanta, Fulton County in particular. I would like to see that no reporting whatsoever. Make it illegal to report prior to all districts having full and ready to be certified counts done. And then everybody reports them at once.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. One of the things that you hear about the 2020 election was that, like, Trump was winning right up until 2 o'clock in the morning, and then there was this bolus of Biden votes that jumped up and put Biden ahead, and he goes on to win the election. And of course, by that point at 2 o'clock in the morning, they knew where all of the red areas had voted, and so there was at least a way of knowing how many votes you would need to inject into the system to win. And so,
yeah, in Georgia it was like 11,000. In Pennsylvania it was about 12. It was like 11 in Michigan. I mean,
that would leave the news people with very little to talk about for most of the night. Because what you would see is no results until all the precincts were in, and this
right,
and all of the numbers were reported at the same time, rather than this. We have now is this sort of trickle of precincts that come in and get reported in real time.
Yeah, the tiny precincts report theirs very early because it doesn't take them as long, and then the big places like Philadelphia, like Fulton County, Detroit, Milwaukee, they don't report until way late, but they already know what the numbers are that they're facing.
So even if they were dishonest, they would have a way of knowing how many votes they needed. Not saying they are dishonest. I'm just saying that the
I'm
way that
saying it.
that the way that the way we have it set up now is, yeah. And look, if you tell me that
And we
they're
incentivize that. More importantly, it's an incentive towards that sort of behavior. And what we want to do is disincentivize that sort of behavior and incentivize better behavior.
yeah, well, not knowing how many votes you needed would make it really hard to just
Make it
manufacture
harder,
them.
right?
Yeah. By the way, my you're hearing the dog probably in the background. He's decided to be a watchdog now, rather than to lay at my feet and chew on all of the electrical cables. Now he's decided to go bark.
That could be a jolting experience.
Yeah. Well, for him, it certainly would be. So I look at how this election is going, and I just have no way. This whole thing, and does this change? Perhaps this disaster of this hurricane, does this have an effect on the election that's now just 4 weeks from now?
I mean, it's possible. It, we've done it before and managed to, uh, get people to vote. Um, but if the aid is slow and forthcoming, is hindered and um, blocked, uh, yeah, that could throw North Carolina. I mean, and that's
And North Carolina is close because
yeah,
you've got the eastern half of the
got a
state, which is,
Democratic governor,
yeah, it's pretty solid blue in the eastern half of the state. The western half of the
right?
state is where most of the red votes are coming from. That is now the area has been devastated. Are those people going to be able to vote? I
Yeah, that's a
I
real question.
I don't know.
I know that David Axelrod was very excited that they wouldn't be able to vote. Politico seemed to be pretty excited about it.
Yeah, so that could throw North Carolina just that alone. Now, I'm not concerned about Tennessee being thrown, and
No,
I'm less Tennessee's going to vote for Trump no matter what. So,
yeah,
so it'll just be by a smaller margin than we
it could hurt
expected.
Virginia, but
It
there's
could hurt.
just
It could hurt Georgia, but again, Georgia doesn't have the same sort of
it's not as
again
bad.
geographical
And
and
the parts of
logistic
Virginia
difficulty.
that are affected are fairly small population wise. Um, North Carolina and Tennessee are I mean, it is sparsely populated, a lot of little, small towns, but there are still a fair number of people there. Like you said, Tennessee, it's not going to make much difference, but it could make a difference in Carolina. And I think they have what, 14 electoral votes, something like that.
13 or 14. I don't remember right off the top of my
I don't
head.
remember off the top of my head.
I mean, I can certainly find out pretty quick. Um, I thought it was 13, but it may not.
Virginia's 13. I thought North Carolina had more for some reason, but I don't know. I can't remember.
Oh no, North Carolina 16. So North
16.
Carolina, yeah,
That's a
North
pretty good
Carolina's
chunk.
pretty good chunk. About the same as Ohio with 17. Same as Georgia with 16. Which, by the way, reminds me, we're going to know the result of this election really early on election night.
Kind of like 2016 and 2020. Uh, Pennsylvania is going to be the keystone. It's the keystone state. Um, Whoever wins that is going to have the edge. And if Trump wins, that narrows Harris's potential quite a bit.
Yeah, look,
She would have to sweep.
if Trump wins Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, this is over.
That is over. Then there's nothing she can do. But if he wins Pennsylvania, loses North Carolina, loses Georgia, he'd have to make it up in either Michigan and Wisconsin.
or
Nevada,
Arizona.
and Arizona. And Nevada, and those are all, they could go either way. There's It's hard to say which way they'll go. I know he's leading in a couple and within the margin a couple, but who knows? I don't know how much polling is actually informing us because everything's so close.
I don't know. It depends on the polls that you look at because, and I don't know if they're outliers or if they're just better pollsters, but it looks like Atlas and Rasmussen has some real strong pro-Trump outlier polls, and everybody else is so close. And you would have to actually look into all of these polls. You'd have to delve into the crosstabs. You'd have to see what
And
the
that's what they
voter
do in
model
their
looks like.
internals. Yeah.
It's really, really hard to tell who's going to win this. I have a.
All I can say is that the way the Harris campaign is acting, their internals are showing them bad signs. Uh,
Well,
so they think they're behind.
here's the thing. Whether they're actually behind or not, here's the thing. So in 2020, at this point, Biden was 9 points ahead in the polling. In 16, Clinton was 4.1 points ahead in the polling at this point in the race on October 6th.
Right.
Harris is 2.2. Harris is
She's
underperforming.
way underperforming.
She's
And in the
underperforming
swing
Hillary Clinton.
states, and she's really underperforming in the swing states. And that's what's got them very, very worried. And if I was them, I'd be worried too. Thankfully, the GOP doesn't seem to be trying to rest on its laurels. It's out there working hard on its ground game, which, granted, the Democrats have a better ground game. They just do. They've worked on it for a very long time, and they've done a very good job of getting out the vote. GOP is kind of playing catch up in this regard, but they are working hard at it. And then you got people like Scott Pressler, who isn't even affiliated with any party, and he's been so far in Pennsylvania. I think it's almost like a third more Republicans have been registered than Democrats, and that it's now a majority Republican registrations versus Democrat. I think it's a small majority, but
Yeah, but again, you're registering people who have not really voted in the past. So,
and that's one of the things that the Trump campaign has. Well, they did this in 2016 as well. They went after, and they're doing it again. They're going after the rarely votes or almost never votes crowd. And where do we find those people? A lot of them in the Rust Belt.
yeah, I also have found it very interesting over the past 2 weeks that two major labor unions have now declined
Big deal, right?
to endorse a presidential candidate. These are labor unions that have endorsed a Democrat all the way back to the 60s.
Longer than that.
Yeah, so
I mean, we're going back to FDR here.
so what does that tell us about blue collar voters?
Well, yeah.
I also see
Blue collar
rumblings that
voters were already on the Trump train, right? It's what does it tell us about the relationship between those voters who are union members and their leadership? The leadership is starting to pay attention because it's becoming overwhelming who they're standing behind. And thankfully the union members are standing up for themselves and saying, you know what, we don't want you spending money on that crap. Either don't spend any or endorse who we're mostly behind, which is Trump.
and the unions and the union leadership will simply never do that.
And that's fine. You know what? You take away that money from Democrats, it's a ton of money that unions spend on Democrats. It is a lot of money. Matter of fact, I think the three highest donors overall to Democrats just countrywide are all unions.
Yeah, SEIU, Teamsters, and then I guess the whole
AFL-CIO.
AFL-CIO umbrella organization.
Right.
So there's that sign. There's also at least rumblings of indications that black men are not interested in voting for Kamala Harris.
And putting a dent in that advantage, which goes normally over 90% for Democrats, you get it below 80%, they're getting nervous. You get it close to almost, 70 something, they're toast. Hispanic voters, especially Hispanic men, but also a lot of Hispanic women are now, they're still overall in favor of Democrats, but not by as much as they were in 2020. And that number has been coming down quite a bit. And who can blame them? I mean, the Democrats have absolutely screwed these people over left and right. I'm interested in how the Jewish Americans, I mean, it's not a huge number of voters, obviously, but I'm just kind of curious as to how they will actually vote. I'm wondering if it's going to be a lot more even this time around.
Well, then there's also this 28% of the electorate feels that the country is on the right track. And Harry Ent was on CNN, and we're not going to actually play any of this, but I did want to show this specific screenshot. The average of people who think the country is on the right track is 25% when the incumbent party loses an election, 42% when they win it. 28% is a heck of a lot closer to 25 than it is to 42.
Yeah.
And so this is just another mountain that it seems like Kamala Harris has to climb when most of the country thinks that, according to this poll anyway, 28% think the U.S. is on the right track. That's not a good number. I mean, no. Is there any doubt that if this was any other Republican candidate but Donald Trump, that the polling would be wildly in Trump's favor or wildly in the Republicans' favor?
We thought that about Mitt Romney, and that didn't work. I mean, it doesn't, I don't think it matters. To Democrats, every Republican is a generic Republican, aka Hitler.
Yeah, every Republican is Hitler. So, it was Joe Biden who said that Mitt Romney was going to put black people back in chains.
Back in chains. He wants to put you all back in chains.
Yeah.
What a doofus.
Which, how much also among the electorate is this stuff about, well, democracy is on the ballot and all of that. I mean, after years and cycle after cycle of Republican of the day is Hitler, even John McCain got transformed from a brave maverick to, Adolf Eichmann overnight as soon as he became the Republican nominee in 2008. So
I'll never forget that. Was it Annie Leibovitz who did a photo shoot of him and then showed him with like fangs and blood dripping? It's just like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And Sarah Palin may have been a flake, but she was the only reason that entire campaign got energized.
Yeah, John McCain. I'm still not entirely sure how he won that nomination, but
it's almost like it was his turn or something.
Either that or the Republicans knew, you know what, Americans are going to elect the black guy. So
yeah, let's throw their sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, let's toss a bone to McCain as the sacrificial lamb. We know he's
that
not
is true.
win.
Yeah, it wouldn't have mattered if it had been Ronnie Reagan.
Yeah, yeah, it could have been
That
Ronald
was
Reagan. He'd have lost that election because so many Americans were so keen to say, "I'm not racist. See, I voted for the black guy." I think that was just sort of baked in. But you know, I if you don't look at the polls, which are so close, it is. I mean, they're with everything
they're
is
almost
within.
useless.
Yeah, everything is within the margin of error, so they tell us
Yeah.
nothing. Other than the headline, Harris is ahead in Pennsylvania. Oh yeah, by how much? Oh, 0.3 points. Oh, okay. Again, we have
Did
no
you just
info.
poll Philly?
Yeah, yeah, we have no information, so we're stuck in this position of looking for vibes and feelings and sort of secondary stuff to try to figure out how this thing is going to go. I just my sense is that this is a very winnable election for Donald Trump,
I think so.
and yet I have no real empirical evidence that tells me he's going to win. And certainly not that tells me he's going to win enough to get it above the margin of
Of
skullduggery.
cheating. Yeah, right. No, you're absolutely right. And it really does come down to a handful of states, the four or five we've mentioned. Um, that's where it's going to happen. Like we already know that from like North Dakota down to Texas, it's red, right? Oklahoma's red. Um, uh, Utah's red. And we know the Southeast is red,
Yeah,
other than maybe North Carolina.
the results are baked into the cake for
It's just like
45 of
California's
the
going to be
50
blue, New
states.
York's
Yeah.
going to be blue. Yeah, the entire West Coast will be blue. Uh, New Mexico will be blue.
And by the way,
Illinois.
Real Clear Politics is pretending that Minnesota is a toss-up state, which
That's a tough one.
okay, you can believe that as much as you want. I mean, it's the only state that voted Democrat in 1984, for goodness sakes. So
Well, but he was from Minnesota.
yeah, and that's the only reason it probably went blue
And
because
Waltz is from Minnesota. So
yeah, although when you look at the county by county of Waltz's victory as governor, he really squeaked that one by.
apparently, and he's apparently not very well liked outside the environs of Milwaukee
Or Minnesota or Minneapolis, you mean?
or Minneapolis. Sorry, St. Paul, Minneapolis. Yeah,
Yeah, which of course is the 800-pound gorilla in terms of voting for Minnesota because you've got
that's right. Yeah, that's by far the largest base of voters.
yeah, which of course is solidly Democrat. So I'm going to assume that Minnesota is going to go Democrat, but
I would.
now you're looking at Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Wisconsin and
Again,
Michigan.
it comes down to Pennsylvania, I think.
Yeah,
It
Wisconsin
really
and
does.
Michigan normally reliably blue, but in recent years,
Right.
especially with the blue collar voters and as blue collar voters move towards Trump, I don't know that
Trump is the only reason that they're close.
yeah that
Quite
they're
honestly.
in play.
Yeah.
Sure.
Georgia and North Carolina, we already brought up. Georgia will also be close. I mean, its biggest, voting places are obviously Atlanta,
Fulton County. Yeah.
Fulton County, and really that's the big one. There's a couple of blue pockets, college towns, right? But that's the big one. The rest of it is again pretty sparse, but red dominated. It's kind of like here in Virginia. I mean, Northern Virginia and Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and Richmond kind of dominate everything, and they're very, very, very blue, especially Northern Virginia. Even though there are a large number of people outside of those areas that will vote red every single time, it still gets dominated by those three areas. To the point that my wife was like, we should change the Virginia Constitution so it's more like the Electoral College. And I was like, yes.
Except the Supreme Court has said you can't do that. That would be illegal. That would be
Right.
disenfranchising. What I think is interesting, sort of politico-culturally, if you will. And I don't think that Donald Trump prompted this. I think it has been prompted more by the changes to the Democratic Party than anything that Trump has done. But it certainly looks like we are in the middle of a big realignment of who each of the parties stands for. And this idea...
Well, we've already moved there, right?
Yeah, and this idea that the Democrats are the party of, working Americans and the Republicans are the party of rich fat cats, over the past decade, it's just been completely turned on its head. Because
that's absolutely true.
Outside of Elon Musk, who is the one outlier, millionaires, Peter Thiel maybe, but the ultra rich in this country, the big tech guys, they are solidly on the Democratic side.
All the big hedge fund managers.
Yep.
All the big bank CEOs who end up going to Congress and then going back into their CEO positions. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This realignment has been going on for a while. What we're now seeing is more of a...
It seems like it's been picking up
realignment.
It seems like though it's been picking up pace for the last 10 years. And so
I think that's right. Yeah.
And as the Democratic Party has moved, and I think it's undeniable that the Democratic Party has moved towards the more progressive, I might as well go ahead and say it, Marxist wing of politics. It has brought with it a huge, big donor class. If you want to know who the top 1% is for, it's the Democrats. And the Democrats still talk as if they're the party of labor, and they talk as if they're the party of blue-collar workers. But the reality is that the Democratic Party now incorporates the sort of elite progressive consensus.
Yeah.
And
politics.
And the Republican Party is increasingly, although they certainly have their own elite consensus wing,
absolutely,
what they call the uniparty. The fact is, Republicans are now, and this I think we can say is due to Donald Trump's influence and sort of the populist movement that he's led, it has become the countercultural party.
Yeah, and who it was not Sid Vicious. Who was the other one? Who was the lead singer for the Sex Pistols?
It wasn't Sid Vicious?
No.
Well, let's Google lead singer Sex Pistols.
Sid Vicious has been dead for a long time.
Johnny Rotten.
Johnny
Rotten.
I mean, he came out, and it's been a while now, like maybe 4 or 5 years. He came out and said, I can't believe in this day and age that I'm rooting for conservatives as the counter-revolutionaries or the counter-cultural parties. I mean, and it's so true. This whole woke politics nonsense where and it's all just Marxism, warmed over Marxism. Instead of class, we use race. Instead of sex, we use gender.
Yeah, it's a recapitulated Marxism for the American experience.
Right. Well, it's not just America. It's also European. It's kind of all over the world, really. I mean, well, you're not going to get very far in China or Japan.
Yeah, it becomes a lot more useful in the modern world rather than, 1850 when talking about class meant something. It's a lot more useful to recast that in the oppressed oppressor paradigm.
And that's what it is. And that's exactly what it is. That's the Marxist bent, right? Is there's an oppressor and there's the oppressed. And while historically, and frankly, that Marxist delineation is how a lot of history is taught all the way up through college and grad school. Um, it it was it wasn't as aligned with politics as it was with the ideas of who was in power. That has slowly changed. Well, it didn't slowly change. It actually changed quite rapidly by the progressive era. But now we're just reordering the terms. It's the exact same prescriptions, the exact same analysis. There's really nothing new but new terms. That's all it is.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating how quickly it has happened in our lifetime. We have gone from Bill Clinton in a State of the Union address, getting a standing O for saying the era of big government is over.
Is it, Bill? Is it?
To John Kerry coming out this last week, and also Hillary Clinton and others, talking about how the First Amendment really is just a hindrance for us to maintain control over information.
All their inner Woodrow Wilsons are starting to come out.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, this is the same party. So how did we make that switch? And look, Bill Clinton was president until 2000. That was 24 years ago. And we have seen just a sea change in what the Democratic Party is and what they stand for. Sure, some things have been unchanged.
Well, and in the Republican Party, too. We drifted very quickly away from, not that the Republican Party was all that a stalwart, truly conservative party. They were, for a time in the 60s. I mean, was Nixon really a conservative? I mean, he started the freaking EPA. You know, only Nixon could go to China, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, the parties were much less ideological.
Well, and they had a lot more agreement with each other. I mean, people forget that, JFK and his brother Bobby were staunch anti-communists. You know, they were best buds with what's his face from Minnesota. It did all the trials. HUAC. Well, he wasn't on HUAC because he was in the Senate. But
McCarthy.
McCarthy, yeah, thank you, Senator McCarthy. I mean,
Republican
they were
from
best
Wisconsin.
buds because they were all anti-communist. And then in the 70s, communism got a second look.
Yeah, but it's just in the last 25 years, the change between the two parties has
it's been dramatic.
Has been dramatic, and several Democrats or former Democrats have pointed out that over the last 20 years, I haven't changed. I still believe the same stuff I believed 20 years ago, and my party has left me. It has gone so far off to the left that I'm now a conservative. I think it's really weird whenever I see people on the left refer to Tulsi Gabbard as, a far right influencer. Really? Tulsi Gabbard? Far right?
Yeah, she's pretty milquetoast lefty. I mean, she's fairly central left, I guess. I mean, her most left-leaning things are really about military engagements, and so in that she's really no more far left than Rand Paul.
Well, it's been a weird 20 years because what we've gone are
have we been on that long?
Yeah, we have.
Holy shit, we have been on.
9/11 changed a lot, certainly
Everything.
With the Republican Party and under George W. Bush. The Republican Party, which had historically been the more isolationist, of the two parties in America.
But it was always the law and order party,
Yeah, but after 9/11, it turned into the permanent war
the
party,
militarist. Yeah.
which is,
And the Democrats didn't change. They stayed militarist.
yeah. And so it's just been weird to watch. And I think, once again, Trump is a symptom of this change.
Absolutely.
The Republican Party has become more of a refuge for a more populist stream of American politics. Donald Trump has been the person over the last decade who has been more or less the embodiment of that message. And I think this is Donald Trump's last hurrah. Win or lose, this is his last
It will
election.
be. Yeah, absolutely. It will be. And he's even said so himself. He's not going to try again.
Yeah.
He's 77, 78.
He's 78 at this point. So, yeah, he's not going to run again. Even if he loses,
No.
he's not going to run again as an 82-year-old.
No.
So I think it does bring up an interesting question of win or lose, this is Donald Trump's last hurrah. If he wins, maybe we can assume that J.D. Vance takes up that mantle, although we generally tend not to like electing sitting vice presidents. We've done it, once since 1840 something with George H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
We may or may not do it this time, but we tend to not like electing sitting vice presidents.
I mean, does LBJ count? I mean, I guess not. Really.
Yeah, he ran as the incumbent president in 1964.
That's true.
So
No, good point. Good point. Yeah.
So
Truman.
does Vance pick? Well, again, Truman ran as the
He was the
president
sitting
in
president.
1948. So does Vance inherit this mantle, or where does it go? Because the interesting thing, one of the more
I think a
interesting
lot of
things
people would like him to.
Yeah, but one of the more interesting things about Trump is he's got this movement behind him that he's built. It's a movement that may put him back into the White House for a second term in a month from now. He'll have his 4 years. And then what? Or if he loses, and then what? Because we have Trump and we have this movement that's built around him. And Trump is about to exit the stage, either in November or 4 years hence. This is his last hurrah. And I look around, who becomes the inheritor of that mantle post-Trump? And I don't know that there are any clear candidates for that. And I
Really,
don't.
I would disagree. I would think, well, certainly Vance, Santoris, DeSantis, Ted Cruz is always going to be in that mix, as will Rand Paul.
Ted Cruz will never be president of the United States.
I tend to agree, and neither will
Nor
Rand
will
Paul.
Rand Paul.
But DeSantis certainly has an inside lane. Vance, by virtue of being a vice presidential candidate and acquitting himself incredibly well, I mean, not that it was much of a contest against Walz, but against Walz and the two ABC
Moderators.
or CBS, whatever it was, moderators, he wiped the floor with them. And it was not even close. Even Democrats admitted he won the debate. He was cordial. He was so the opposite of Trump in demeanor and in delivering information. He was not cowed at all. They tried to shut him down. They even turned off his mic at one point. But he didn't shy away from those things. He's also been the one who's been out there the most. Doing all the talk shows, the Sunday shows. He's going into the enemy's lions' dens, and he faces them, and he comes away looking much more intelligent, much more on top of things, and also like a nice guy. I mean, he seems like a really, really nice person.
I don't think vice presidential debates move the needle much.
This one did, though, and they showed that.
Let me finish. I don't think vice presidential debates in normal times move the needle much. I don't think people care much who the vice presidential candidate is.
Typically, no.
I think in this case, the contrast between him and Tim Walz was very stark. And the contrast between him and Donald Trump also turned out to be very stark.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you saw someone with a command of the facts, I would argue a superior command of the facts than Mike Pence showed in 2020. He was likable. It was, at least superficially, a much more cordial debate. It was much more of a traditional presidential debate. And I think you could argue that Vance could
It was
afford
like
to be.
Douglas Lincoln debate.
Yeah, I think you could argue that Vance could afford to be cordial because Tim Walz was so much like a deer in the headlights. And yeah, could not. Yeah, that is that meme and the meme of JD Vance going.
It's great. I love this.
Um,
My favorite one is, did you brush your teeth? Yes.
yeah,
With
exactly.
toothpaste?
But did this debate move the needle? Are there people who, first of all, I think, is there anybody who is on the fence about Trump at this point?
I can't imagine.
Neither can I. And so, does this debate move the needle? Because he now shows quite a contrast between Trump and certainly a command of the facts, despite the fact checking that was attempted against him on more than one occasion.
Fact checking. Well, it does make a difference, though, that Trump, should he win, is automatically a lame duck president. So you're looking at the future now, not 8 years from now, but 4 years from now, at least potentially. And I think that does make a difference. I think that made this debate a little bit more important and made his choice a little bit more important. And while I was doubtful at first, I think JD Vance has shown himself to be incredibly self-aware, self-confident, and able to handle anything that's thrown at him. He just seems like he can handle anything, and it's not going to bother him. He's not going to lose his cool. He's not going to freak out. He's going to be bug-eyed. He's going to be able to handle it. And he just comes. He just gives off such a sense of confidence and capability. And competence is something that is sorely missed amongst our political class.
Well, here's also the other thing, because he's been painted in the press as some sort of wild-eyed radical.
Right.
And then he shows up at that debate and he looks like anything but that. And you have to wonder if the difference between what the American people saw and what they have been told might make them put two and two together and wonder, what else have I been told that may be a bit of an exaggeration?
I will say anecdotally that I have two particular friends who are dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. One grew up, raised in California, never really left those California roots. And that person has already expressed that that person will, I'm trying not to use pronouns, that person will vote for Trump because of the worry about what a Harris administration brings, about how far left and crazy the Democrats have gotten in accommodating just absolutely outlandish things. Don't discount how harmful it's been to Democrats with all this, alphabet mafia stuff. It's hurt them quite a bit.
I hate anecdotal stories like that because they have a tendency to give one hope.
And that's the last thing you want.
And that's the last thing I want. Um, it would be nice to just sit back and think, look, the American people are sensible enough to know that much of what the Democrats are proposing is just batshit insane.
I think that's true. But will they go out and vote? That's always the real question. Will they actually go, or will they just say, "What can I do?"
Or will it be, yeah, fine. I don't like Trump. I don't like her. She's a Democrat. Another 4 years.
Yeah, they both suck, so it's just going to suck a different way.
Yeah, so another 4 years of that, and then Trump will be gone, and then we'll take another.
I mean, how many people that would actually lean right in California don't even bother to vote? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, look, when you live in a state where 2/3 of the voters are registered as Democrat, and you know that everything is a foregone conclusion, it does make voting feel like more of an exercise in futility. And I can say that being a
waste of time,
being a voter in California, and look, I often feel the freedom in one sense of saying, well, I don't have to vote for a Republican. I know the Democrat is going to win, but, I can throw votes at libertarians or other independents.
The Green Party,
I don't know that
the Constitution Party,
the Green Party. I think I'm probably far
you could
more
write yourself in, Dale.
I'm far more inclined to vote for the Libertarian Party. But I feel the freedom to do that in one sense. And yet in the other sense, California always has this buttload of ballot propositions because California has, since the turn of the 20th century, been one of these states that is largely governed by popular democracy for, changing state law via the ballot. And it is disheartening because now it's not a party thing, right? It is just yes or no on this ballot proposition. And in that sense, I don't feel that freedom of, well, I can just vote however I want because now I know what the electorate of California is likely to vote for. And all I'm doing is registering one tiny protest to join the 30 to 40% of Californians who read a ballot measure and say, this is insane. We're going to do it, but it's insane.
I've at least gotten my wife to understand that whenever the Virginia, and we have them on the ballot this time too, whenever they ask for more money, for more bonds, no, just no. And she's finally glommed onto that. It's like, yeah, that is stupid. Why do they keep taking on debt? We've already got $1 billion of debt. Why we take on more?
Yeah, I love the way they do it in California. It's always, we need a bond measure so that Johnny can learn to read. This is for the schools. Why do you hate the schools? Why do you hate children?
Right. Money is fungible, as I recall.
Yeah. And of course it always turns. But I mean, look, this is a state that's prepared to spend at this point, what appears to be $150 billion to build a train from Fresno to Bakersfield.
Well, let's talk about reparations. Although I think that got tabled finally.
Yeah, reparations got tabled. Yeah, because
that was probably a smart idea.
Yeah, that was going to be super expensive.
It was going to be like $3 trillion.
Yeah, that was going to be money that we didn't have. And it's fascinating. California never was a slave state.
A slave state.
California was always a free state. So
if anything, they should be giving reparations to the Chinese. Right?
Yeah, exactly. At least the Chinese were held in indentured servitude on the railroad. And so a state that never had slaves and never had slave owners is now going to pay the descendants of people who never had slaves money
Who
from
never were slaves.
those descendants to people who, if they're from California, never were slaves. But it doesn't matter. I mean, there's no reason to think logically about it because it's not a logical exercise, right?
Right.
It's literally a religious exercise in purchasing indulgences.
Well, what is it you always say? You can't argue somebody out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into.
Exactly. And it's a religious impulse. It's basically buying indulgences, and that will free us from
That's a
sin.
good, yeah, that's a great analogy. That is really what it is. That's right.
It will free us from a sin that we never committed in our state. But other people,
Yeah, but you're from Texas.
But
You're
other
already
people,
guilty by association.
but other people who look like me did bad things 160 years ago.
I'm fucking Irish.
Yes,
I came over. My people came over in the 1840s. We didn't have fucking slaves. We were basically a notch above slaves.
Yeah, but again, people who look like you did bad things to people who don't look like you, so you're on the hook for that. This whole idea that there are historical injustices that can
be righted,
that we can right in the modern day. Yeah.
Well,
I'm sure there's
supposed to.
I'm sure there's some
reputations.
I'm sure there's some Celt in Wales who has a good argument against the Germans for Anglo-Saxon reparations. We can take this back as far as we want, or heck, they're probably Celts.
Cornwall.
They're probably Anglo-Saxons who probably have a bone to pick with Italy.
Absolutely. Oh, not to mention Norway and Denmark.
And Denmark. Yeah, again,
it's stupid.
Yeah,
it makes no damn sense.
No, but again, religious dogma often doesn't. That's why it's dogma. You just have to accept it as a matter of faith. And at least here in California, we've tabled that. But it's certainly not an issue that's going to go away in the near future because...
Not once you've raised it.
Yeah, and certainly the Democrats are gonna keep it alive.
Well, it's what they see as the ability to fleece the taxpayers in order to buy themselves votes. I mean, that's literally all it is. It is simply a transfer scheme to say, hey, look, we'll use our power to take from those people who we've told you to hate, and hopefully you still hate, in order to give you money. And then you get free money. Isn't that an awesome deal? And just keep hating those people.
Yeah, it's amazing how we have gone from an Enlightenment civilization to
the de-enlightenment.
It really has been a process of de-enlightenment and religiousification.
But a secular religiosity.
It's a secular religion. We apparently don't need a god to impose moral duties on us.
No, there was
the past the past serves well enough for that.
There was some guy who said that everything for the state, nothing outside the state, everything within the state. And that seems to be the religion. Who was that guy? Oh, that's right. It was the fascist. It was Mussolini.
Yeah, well, that's the direction that we're heading in. And it's getting back to this realignment of American politics. When I was a kid, if someone jumped up and started going on and on about the First Amendment and how important it was, you automatically knew that was a Democrat.
Right.
And now,
the 60s and 70s were filled with Democrats arguing that.
And now, if someone gets up and talks about how, we should restrict the First Amendment so that there's an exception for hate speech and misinformation, and we should be able to censor people, you can be sure that they're a Democrat.
Tim Walz outright said that in the debate, that there's somehow an exception for hate speech to in the First Amendment. No. He also said
Don't
you can't shout fire in a theater.
don't get me started.
Yes, you can.
Don't get me started on the shout fire in a theater.
I hate that thing.
First
And
of
that's
all,
all the fault of Holmes,
yeah.
Justice Holmes.
First of all, it's you can't falsely shout fire in a theater because
And
you
even
can,
then,
yeah, but if there's a fire, you can yell fire. But beyond that, the thing that this is a personal bugbear of mine. It's one that I'm pretty much sure that you share. But this is a case that this decision was taken from, the phrase from which that decision was taken was a case about people who were protesting World War I.
that's right.
And they lost that case. That was a free speech loss. Justice Holmes compared publicly stating opposition to a government policy, our entry into World War I, as dangerous as falsely yelling fire in a crowded theater. And that decision, by the way, has been overturned by a later Supreme Court that said, hey, you know what? Saying stuff that you don't like about the government or criticizing the government, that is a core protected free speech right. You get to say that.
And that's been reinforced for about 60, 70 years.
So I hate the fact that people, A, misquote the justice in the way that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. Yeah, you can. And also, it doesn't matter because that decision has been overturned. And that was an argument made in support of stopping Americans from criticizing the government.
Yep. Well, I mean, and that's what they're after right now. That is literally the impetus behind this, whole hate speech and misinformation, disinformation crap.
Look, the director of FEMA this week, I think it was day before yesterday, comes out on national TV and says, there's all these people saying all of this horrible stuff about FEMA and making unfounded accusations. That's dangerous.
Elon Musk took him to task for that.
Oh, it's dangerous to criticize what FEMA is doing. It makes our people feel unsafe.
Who cares?
I don't care about your feelings. I care about the fact that you're a bunch of incompetent buffoons who couldn't find your ass in the dark with a GPS, a flashlight, and a compass.
And isn't that what it kind of comes down to in the end? Is, we put up with this sort of patrician government when they were actually capable of doing things. They could build bridges. They could build rockets, send men to the moon. They could handle disasters. They could fight a war and win it. But, I mean, really, since, the end of World War II, maybe the, 50s were not bad, but...
No, the moon landing. That was the
moon landing. Yeah, that was probably the apex.
That was the last shot of competent government.
And
by the way, we barely managed to do that with George McGovern sitting in the Senate trying to cut NASA's funding.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we kind of did that,
and using Newtonian math.
Yeah, in opposition to. And by the way, by 1973, Congress was done. They were done with NASA. So all this stuff about moon base and Mars and all that stuff, that died. If you'd have told me in 1973 that we're going to stop going to the moon and are probably not going to go back during your lifetime, I never would have believed you.
Yeah.
But 1969 through 1973, that was sort of the high water mark of competent government. And since then, government has gotten larger. It has gotten more bureaucratic, less responsive, less capable of doing anything. I mean,
just completely incompetent.
Look
And
at
that's our ruling class.
look at
Those
the
are
Defense
people
Department. They can't
that think
figure
they
out.
can tell us what to do.
Look at the Defense Department on an annual basis. They can't figure out where hundreds of millions, tens of billions, in fact, dollars have been spent.
Yep. Nor can they account for what it may have bought, which kind of tells you where it actually went, I think.
I can remember back even in the 80s looking into government spending, looking like at the Air Force. The Air Force was spending $700 for those little stainless steel coffee pots that go inside those Silex coffee makers that were on board aircraft. $795. $500 toilet seats and that kind of stuff.
$500 hammers.
The government was large in the 1960s and early 1970s, but nothing like it is today. You're talking about a government that took up 15% of GDP and a government that today is over 30% of GDP. I think 36% is what government spending is now.
That's just unsustainable. I mean, that's like we're approaching like Greece levels of the government's share of GDP. And you're only talking about the federal government. You're not talking about the state governments as well. Matter of fact, almost all the job growth that we do get to see
are government jobs.
Comes in government jobs.
Yep.
I mean, it's like we got the what was the one that was the FDR thing that was ruled unconstitutional? Think of the last one. The United or the Works Progress Administration. Was that what I can't remember which one it was.
I don't remember if it was specifically
it was one about
WPA,
employing Americans to work for the federal government. And it got overturned before Owen Roberts did his switch in time. That's not a healthy way to have, especially as big a country as we have, a multicultural country that we have. It's that's just completely unhealthy. It's going to end in absolute misery unless somebody does something about it.
Well, we don't have a healthy country, and misery does seem to be the direction we're heading in. And
aw, look whose hope I destroyed.
And no, you have finally become as pessimistic as I am, it appears. But we are out of time, Michael. We're an hour and a half into this, so I think that's enough ranting for 1 week. We'll have to come back, and I'm sure we'll find something to rant about next week, too.
I guarantee it. I will guarantee it right now.
Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.
You too. Bye.
And for all the rest of you who are still remaining, you have a great week, too. We'll talk to you again next time, barring any further accidents or illnesses. I look forward to speaking with you on the next podcast. Have a great week. So long.